My name is Sarah. I am 34 years old, and I am staring at a glowing iPad screen that is about to completely destroy my entire reality. The light from the device casts a cold blue shadow across our dimly lit living room, illuminating the dark circles under my eyes that I earned working 3 separate grueling jobs to keep my jobless husband fed and housed. My hands are shaking so violently that I can barely swipe through the banking application he carelessly left open on the coffee table. For 3 agonizing years, I have been drowning in debt, sacrificing my health, my sleep, and my sanity, genuinely believing we were always one bad week away from losing our home and ending up on the streets.
But right here, right in front of my tear-filled eyes, are 5 secret bank accounts under his name. The balances stare back at me like a sick, twisted joke, totaling over $250,000. My chest tightens, the air suddenly sucked out of the room as the sickening realization washes over me. The man I have been killing myself to support hasn't been unemployed at all. He has been watching me suffer, watching me break down in tears from exhaustion while sitting on a mountain of hoarded cash. And as I hear the bathroom door click open down the hall, I know exactly what is about to happen. Before I tell you how this horrific nightmare unraveled, I want to ask you something. I always wonder where my story reaches people, so please tell me in the comments, from what city and state are you listening to this right now? It helps me feel a little less alone in all of this to know where you are. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to the days when I actually believed my husband was just an innocent victim of bad luck, a terrible economy, and severe depression.
My husband, Mark, who is 36 years old, lost his job at a major logistics firm 3 years ago. At the time, it felt like a massive tragedy for both of us. He came home with his cardboard box full of desk supplies, looking absolutely defeated. And I did what any loving, loyal wife would do. I held him, I kissed his forehead, and I promised him that we would get through this together. I told him to take a month to decompress, to rebuild his resume, and to find something that truly made him happy. I was working as a mid-level administrative assistant, making decent money, but certainly not enough to comfortably carry our mortgage, car payments, and daily living expenses all on my own. But I was willing to tighten my belt. I loved him. When you love someone, you do not abandon them when the storm hits. You build a shelter and you hold their hand until the rain stops.
But the rain never stopped. 1 month turned into 3, 3 months turned into a year, and Mark's job hunt became a phantom activity. He would tell me he sent out dozens of resumes every week, but the phone never rang. He claimed the market was oversaturated, that his specific skills were no longer in demand, and that employers were only looking for fresh, cheap college graduates. I believed every single word. I watched him sit on the couch day after day, playing video games in his pajamas, surrounded by empty soda cans and pizza boxes, and I convinced myself that this was what severe depression looked like. I read articles about how unemployment destroys a man's ego, and I felt nothing but profound pity and sympathy for him. I decided that I needed to step up even more. I could not let us lose the house we had worked so hard to buy.
That was when I took on my second job. My administrative office hours were strictly from 9 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon, so I found a position as a morning waitress at a local diner. My alarm would scream at 4 in the morning, a harsh, jagged sound that felt like a physical blow to my chest every single day. I would drag my exhausted body out of our warm bed, careful not to wake Mark, who was always snoring softly, wrapped in the heavy, expensive blankets I had paid for. The diner smelled intensely of stale coffee, old grease, and cheap syrup, a scent that clung to my hair and seeped into my pores, impossible to wash out. For 4 solid hours before my office job, I balanced heavy trays of pancakes and bacon, forcing a bright plastic smile for the early morning truck drivers and grumpy commuters. My feet would throb in pain, my calves burning with every step across the sticky linoleum floor. Every single dollar I made in tips was carefully folded and stuffed into a jar in the kitchen, earmarked for our electricity bill or Mark's supposed job hunting expenses.
By the time I finished my diner shift at 8:30, I had exactly 30 minutes to change my clothes in the cramped employee bathroom, wipe the sweat from my forehead, and drive across town to my office job. Sitting at a desk under blinding fluorescent lights for 8 hours felt like a different kind of torture. My brain was constantly in a thick, heavy fog of sleep deprivation. I drank so much cheap office coffee that my stomach was in a constant state of acidic pain. My boss would hand me stacks of paperwork, and I would just nod, plastering on a fake energetic expression while secretly calculating in my head if we had enough money left in the checking account to buy groceries that week. On my lunch breaks, I did not eat with my coworkers. Instead, I would walk out to my car, recline the seat, and sleep for exactly 25 minutes, setting 3 different alarms because I was terrified of not waking up. But even with the diner job and the office job, the math simply was not working out. Inflation was rising, the property taxes went up, and Mark's daily habits were draining our resources. He insisted he needed high-speed internet for his job hunt and a premium subscription to various professional networking sites. He ordered food delivery almost every day for lunch because he said he was too stressed to cook. I could not bring myself to argue with a depressed man, so I took on a third job. I signed up for a remote freelance data entry position that allowed me to work flexible hours from home. This meant that after I finished my office job at 5, I would commute home, make dinner for Mark, clean the kitchen, and then sit at our small dining table from 7 in the evening until 1 or 2 in the morning, typing endless rows of meaningless numbers into spreadsheets for pennies per task.
My entire existence was reduced to a brutal, mechanical cycle of labor. I stopped seeing my friends, I stopped reading books, I stopped watching television. I stopped feeling like a human being. I was just a machine designed to generate money to keep the lights on. I lost 15 pounds because I was too tired to eat properly. My hair started thinning from the immense stress. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a pale, aging ghost staring back at me. And through it all, Mark remained exactly the same. He would occasionally rub my shoulders for 5 seconds, tell me I was a superwoman, and then go right back to his video games, complaining about how hard his life was because a recruiter had ignored his email.
My sister, Emily, who is 33 years old, was the only person who saw what was truly happening to me. Emily has always been fiercely protective, sharp, and brutally honest. She came over one Sunday afternoon when I was desperately trying to scrub the bathroom floor during my 1 hour of free time. She took the sponge right out of my bleeding, cracked hands, pulled me up from the floor, and looked me dead in the eyes. I will never forget the mixture of anger and sorrow on her face. She told me I looked like I was dying. She pointed a finger toward the living room, where Mark was laughing loudly into a headset while playing an online game, and she told me that I was not supporting a husband. I was enabling a parasite. We got into a massive screaming argument. I defended him passionately. I told her she did not understand depression, that she was being cruel, and that marriage meant for better or for worse. I practically threw her out of my house that day, choosing my blind loyalty over my own flesh and blood. But Emily's words planted a tiny, painful seed of doubt in my exhausted mind. I started noticing small, strange inconsistencies. A few months after that argument, we were facing a bitterly cold winter, and the heating bill was astronomical. I was sitting at the dining table, crying silently over the unpaid notice, calculating which credit card had enough room left to cover it. Mark came out of the bedroom wearing a brand new, incredibly expensive pair of noise-canceling headphones. When I tearfully asked him how he got them, he casually waved his hand and said a gaming buddy had sent them to him as a gift because they were an old model. At the time, I accepted the excuse because I was simply too tired to interrogate him, but the image of those shiny, expensive headphones stayed burned in my memory while I wore a heavy winter coat inside my own house to save money on the heating. Then came the day that shattered my world forever. It was a Tuesday, a day I was supposed to be working my office job, but the physical toll of the 3 jobs had finally caught up with me in a spectacular fashion. I fainted in the office break room. I just completely collapsed, hitting the floor hard. My boss was terrified and insisted I go home immediately and rest for the remainder of the week. I drove home in a daze, my body aching, my vision blurry. I didn't call Mark to tell him I was coming home early. I just wanted to crawl into my bed and sleep for 1,000 years. When I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the house was quiet. The shower was running in the master bathroom. Mark was bathing. I dropped my bag on the floor and walked over to the couch to sit down and take my shoes off. That was when I saw his iPad resting on the coffee table. Normally it was locked, but he must have been using it right before jumping into the shower and forgot to press the sleep button. The screen was bright and active. I did not intend to snoop, I swear. I just reached out to push the button to turn the screen off to save the battery. But as my finger hovered over the device, a banner notification dropped down from the top of the screen. It was an email from a boutique wealth management firm. The subject line read, "Your monthly portfolio performance review." My hand froze in midair. Wealth management? Portfolio? My heart started pounding a frantic, erratic rhythm against my ribs. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Without thinking, operating purely on a surge of adrenaline and sudden, terrifying suspicion, I tapped the notification. The email opened. It addressed Mark by his full name and congratulated him on the steady growth of his assets. But the email was not the worst part. The email contained a direct link to his financial dashboard. Because he had been actively logged in, the link bypassed the password screen and took me directly into a comprehensive financial application. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat, choking me. The dashboard displayed 5 different accounts. 5! There was a primary checking account, a high-yield savings account, 2 different investment portfolios, and a specialized offshore account. I tapped on the balances, my vision swimming with tears of absolute disbelief. The checking account held $45,000. The savings account held $80,000. The investments and the offshore account made up the rest. The total sum was a staggering $242,000. I scrolled down, my trembling fingers leaving smudge marks on the glass. I looked at the transaction history. There were massive, regular deposits coming in every single month from a major international tech consultancy firm. My brain violently struggled to process the information. He wasn't unemployed. He never stopped working. He had secretly secured a highly lucrative, fully remote consulting contract shortly after losing his local logistics job. He had been working from his computer in his home office, likely putting in just a few hours a day while claiming to be gaming or job hunting. He was pulling in a massive corporate salary, entirely in secret, and depositing every single cent into private accounts that I had absolutely no knowledge of. He watched me wake up at 4 in the morning to serve greasy pancakes to strangers. He watched me faint from exhaustion. He watched me cry over a heating bill. He let me pay the mortgage, buy the groceries, pay the utilities, and fund his entire existence, all so he could hoard his wealth untouched. I felt physically sick. A wave of profound, acidic nausea rose in my throat. This was not just a lie. This was psychological torture. This was financial abuse of the most calculated, evil kind. Every memory of the last 3 years flashed before my eyes, tainted and poisoned by this revelation. Every time he kissed my forehead and called me his strong girl. Every time he sighed heavily and said the job market was just too tough. It was all a performance, a cruel, sadistic performance, while he leached off my life force to build his secret empire. The water stopped running in the bathroom. The silence in the house was suddenly deafening. I heard the bathroom door open and the soft padding of Mark's bare feet walking down the hallway. I did not move. I stayed frozen on the couch, the iPad clutched tightly in both of my hands, the screen still glowing brightly with the evidence of his betrayal. He walked into the living room, a towel wrapped around his waist, rubbing his wet hair with another towel.
He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me sitting there. The color instantly drained from his face.
"Sarah?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What are you doing home so early? Are you okay?" I slowly looked up at him. I didn't feel sad anymore. The tears had stopped completely. In their place was a cold, hard, terrifying rage. A rage so pure and concentrated that I felt like I could burn the entire house down with just my gaze. I turned the iPad around so the screen faced him. I didn't say a word. I just let him look at his own secret fortune. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He took a step back, raising his hands in a defensive gesture. "Sarah, listen. I can explain. It's not what it looks like. You don't understand the whole picture." "Explain it to me then." My voice came out as a low, dangerous whisper. I sounded like a stranger to myself. "Explain to me how you have $250,000 while I have been working 3 jobs, destroying my body, and crying over the electric bill. Explain to me how you watched me collapse today from exhaustion, knowing you could have paid off our entire house with a single wire transfer."
Mark's demeanor suddenly shifted. The panic faded, replaced by a cold, arrogant defensiveness that I had never seen before. He crossed his arms over his chest. "You are terrible with money, Sarah. You've always been emotional and impulsive. If I had told you about the consulting contract, you would have just found ways to spend it. You would have wanted to renovate the kitchen, or go on expensive vacations, or lend money to your sister. I was securing our future. I was building a nest egg for early retirement. You were handling the day-to-day bills just fine. I needed to know you were committed to our survival. I was actually protecting us." The sheer audacity, the unbelievable cruelty of his justification snapped the last remaining thread of my sanity. I stood up, the iPad falling to the couch. I didn't just yell, I roared. 3 years of repressed exhaustion, fear, and pain erupted from my soul. I screamed at him until my throat bled. I called him a monster, a parasite, a sociopath. I told him he didn't want a wife, he wanted a free maid and a sponsor. He tried to grab my arm to calm me down, but I shoved him backward with a strength I didn't know I possessed. He stumbled and fell against the wall. "Get out," I screamed, pointing at the front door. "Get out of my house right now. Pack a bag and get out, or I swear to God I will call the police and tell them you are threatening me. You have 5 minutes." He tried to argue. He tried to say it was his house too, but he saw the absolute madness in my eyes. He realized that I was completely broken, and a broken person has nothing left to lose. He scrambled into the bedroom, threw some clothes into a duffel bag, and practically ran out the front door, peeling out of the driveway in the car that I paid the insurance for. The moment the door slammed shut, my legs gave out. I collapsed onto the living room rug, curled into a tight ball, and sobbed until I was violently gasping for air. I cried for the years I had lost. I cried for the youth I had sacrificed. I cried for the absolute fool I had been. When I finally found the strength to move, my first phone call was not to Mark. It was to my sister, Emily. She was at my house in under 20 minutes. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't lecture me. She just sat on the floor with me, held me tightly, and helped me pack up the rest of his belongings into garbage bags, tossing them onto the front porch. The very next morning, I did not go to the diner. I did not log in to my remote data entry job. I called my office and officially requested a 2-week medical leave. Then I drove straight to the most ruthless, highly rated divorce attorney I could find in our city. I walked into her office, dropped printed screenshots of all 5 bank accounts onto her mahogany desk, and told her my story. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Diane, looked at the papers, looked at my exhausted face, and smiled a cold, predatory smile. She told me that what Mark had done was not just morally bankrupt, it was legally disastrous for him in a community property state. The legal battle that followed over the next 8 months was vicious, ugly, and incredibly satisfying. Mark hired his own lawyer and tried to claim that the accounts were separate property, that they were tied to a business entity he created before our marriage. But Diane was relentless.
She subpoenaed every single financial record, every email, every contract. The discovery process proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that every single dollar in those 5 accounts was earned during our marriage, while I was solely covering all marital debts and living expenses. The day of the final settlement hearing is a day I will cherish for the rest of my life. We sat in the mediation room, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. The judge, an older man who had clearly seen every type of marital fraud imaginable, looked at Mark with open disgust. Mark sat there, looking small, pale, and defeated, wearing a cheap suit because his assets had been frozen during the proceedings. Because I had paid 100% of the marital debts, the mortgage, the utilities, and the food for 3 years while he actively hid marital income, the settlement was devastating for him. The judge awarded me full ownership of our house, completely removing Mark's name from the deed. But the real victory was the financial division. Not only was I awarded exactly half of the $242,000 he had hidden, but the judge also ordered Mark to reimburse me for half of all the living expenses I had paid over those 3 years out of his remaining share. Furthermore, he was ordered to pay all of my legal fees. By the time the math was done, Mark was left with less than $40,000, no house, no wife, and a ruined reputation, as the court records were completely public. When we walked out of the courthouse, Mark tried to approach me. He looked pathetic, tears welling in his eyes. He started to say my name, reaching his hand out. I didn't even break my stride. I looked right through him as if he were a ghost, completely invisible, and walked out into the bright afternoon sun, breathing fresh air for the first time in 3 years. Rebuilding my life took time. The physical exhaustion lingered for months, but the mental weight was gone. I quit the diner job immediately. I permanently deleted the remote data entry software from my computer. I kept my office job, but because I no longer had to support a parasitic grown man, my single income was more than enough to live comfortably, especially with the massive settlement safely invested in my own, perfectly legal, completely transparent bank accounts. I started sleeping for a full 8 hours every night. I started eating real, healthy food. I reconnected with my friends, and my bond with my sister Emily became stronger than ever. The dark circles under my eyes slowly faded away, replaced by a genuine, peaceful light. Looking back now, the greatest lesson I learned from this entire nightmare is that blind loyalty is not a virtue. It is a dangerous trap. True love requires partnership, transparency, and shared burdens. If someone is perfectly content watching you destroy yourself to keep them comfortable, they do not love you. They are only using you. Never let your empathy blind you to the reality of how you are being treated. I have to ask you, after hearing everything I went through and how I handled the discovery, what would you have done in that exact moment holding the iPad? Would you have confronted him immediately like I did, or would you have gathered evidence in secret first? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Until the next story.